Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Opinion Podcast. I'm Ginnie Graham with I'm the editorials editor at Tulsa World, and I am here with Lisa Kennedy Lawrence. And she created the Birthday Fairy. And that's what we're going to talk about. It's the column I wrote about for this weekend that everyone should read. And a mutual friend introduced this to me. And so it deserves attention. And that's why I have Lisa as a guest this week. And I'll just start with explain a little bit what the Birthday Fairy Project is.
All right. Thank you so much, Ginnie, for doing this and giving this project the attention that it does deserve. It's not my kind of thing to do something public like this, but I do believe the issue is really important. So after Uvalde, I pretty much couldn't get over the ramifications of that event, even though there were others before that were equally disturbing. And it just kind of stayed with me. And so I decided to kind of start looking for things that I could do. And I just trying to think of a way to approach the issue in a unique way. It kind of struck me that these events happen and they dominate our attention for a few days on the news, and then they kind of disappear and we don't think about them. And so I started thinking about a way to make it unique, and the fact that everybody has a birthday, and that is a way to approach this by looking at the birthdays of the victims. So I actually just started Googling and looking to see if anybody had compiled a database to recognize birthdays of victims of mass shootings or school shootings. I was just going to share the posts. I was just thinking of an easy way to do this, and I couldn't find anything. Eventually, I did discover that some of the specific organizations, for instance, Pulse Orlando, has a Facebook page, and they recognize the birthdays of their victims, but there was nothing that put them all together. And so I just kind of slowly set out to start recognizing birthdays, and it started in June as me just posting on my personal page, and then by August I created a Facebook page, and in October I created a Twitter account, and I've just continued to post. So,
and what's interesting about it is we've had, like you mentioned, we have a lot of mass shootings, and there's been this sort of industry of memorials that pops up. And so I found it interesting that what you're celebrating is the celebration of when their lives began, not when their lives ended. And I find that very sweet, because those families are certainly recognizing those days. You know, when loved ones pass on, we still remember their birthdays.
right.
But you had mentioned that Uvalde was the one that got you. And I think everyone has in this mass shooting era, starting with Columbine. And I should mention that you were a public school teacher at the time. And so you lived through that change. What do you think it was about Uvalde that cut you deep, that stuck with you?
You know, I think probably Sandy Hook affected me the same way. I was just at a slightly different place in my life. I think when Sandy Hook happened, we all probably thought this is the worst thing ever and it will never happen again. The fact that something so much like Sandy Hook happened again, including a very young man with a very deadly weapon, and attacking our most vulnerable citizens in the way that they did in both of those cases. I think we tend to look at the gun issue and say, there's nothing we can do. These things are going to happen. But to me, those two cases, and actually delving into hundreds of these shootings, there clearly are things that can be done. And I think we're doing a disservice to those victims when we say we can't do anything to stop it. We clearly can.
and you call it the birthday fairy, and there's a sweet story behind that. So explain where the name, the birthday fairy, came from, which is what you call the project, both on your Facebook page, the birthday fairy, and then you have a Twitter account that's tied to that too.
Yes. So my mom, a little later in her life, when her kids were grown, one of the things she started doing for our kids and then for us, and eventually it became something she did for friends and friends of friends. She would call people she didn't even know, but she started just maintaining a calendar, and she would call people on their birthday and she would sing, and she would sing the birthday song, and she would sign off with, "This is the birthday fairy, toodaloo." She didn't particularly even want to have a conversation with them. She would call people, like I said, that she didn't know, and they wouldn't have any idea who it was. But, her coworkers and her friends would put her up to calling them. One of her friends even had a sister who was a retired police detective, and, he had her call, and it kind of sent her into a spin about, who is this person calling me on my birthday. It was just kind of a funny thing that went on for years. So eventually it was kind of organic. I think maybe my idea of recognizing birthdays came from my mom, who we lost a couple of years ago. And so I think in a way it organically kind of became an idea that I had. So then when I went from posting on my personal page to actually creating a Facebook page, we were at our lake house on 10 Killer, sitting around with both my brother and his wife and my husband, Jeff. And, I was saying, I think I'm going to go ahead and try to make this a page and, try to publicize it a little more. It was actually my husband's idea, just go ahead and call it the birthday fairy, because that's really that's who your mom was. And that's, a fitting tribute to her.
Tell people she had a signature sign off, like after all these, she would sing, and then what was it she would say?
It was, "This is the birthday fairy, toodaloo." So I shortened it to toodaloo in the Twitter account, but she was very exuberant. If you'd ever met her, you would know exactly what I'm talking about. She was a little over the top.
Well, this is a good place. What is the Twitter handle? So if people wanted to follow you on Twitter or follow this project on Twitter, what is that?
So I would have made it simpler, but the birthday fairy was already taken on Twitter. So I did the initials TBFP, the birthday fairy project, and then added the toodaloo. So it's TBFP TOODLE _OOO.
So toodaloo.
Yeah.
So, the post itself, because I've been following it a little while, it has it's a celebration of their lives. You include hobbies, their favorite meal, those kind of things. And you don't get that much into how they died. I mean, sometimes you do, just to provide, I think, context. They died on this date. If there was something unusual, just to kind of, because honestly, we have so many that I think you have to almost remind people, what was this shooting? Where was this at? And some people are going to look at that as, or this whole thing as political. It's almost gotten to the point in our culture where if you bring up anything, they're going to look at it like anti-gun, pro-gun, like, black or white, that kind of thing. Yes or no. What do you say to people who will view this and say, oh, this is clearly some liberal anti-gun project? I mean, what's your response to that?
Well, I think the fact that I own guns should carry some weight, perhaps. I've grown up with guns in my house my entire life. My dad owned an archery shop. He was a hunter and a sportsman. My brother and I ran around the woods in our neighborhood growing up with BB guns and pellet guns, and so I've been around guns all my life. I strongly believe that we've been lied to and taught to think that it's very black and white, and it's not black and white. There are common sense things that we can do that will make a huge difference. So I'm not anti-gun. I am pro-gun safety, And I'm also pro reasonable reforms. There are a lot of common sense reforms that we don't enact because we think any kind of restriction or uh, a waiting period or a red flag or any of these reasonable things we think somehow are a violation of our rights. And I believe those are things that protect our innocent citizens, like those kids at Uvalde and Sandy Hook.
But what's interesting is that you sort of purposely keep off gun debate on the notes, because
Right.
the posts are clearly about these people, and that's what I enjoy it for that reason. It's also, it's bittersweet because they're no longer here. And you said that some of the you've had when we spoke before, only positive interactions with families of victims, that for a while you were worried how that might be viewed. But and I started thinking about it, like if it were my loved one, I would be grateful that someone's remembering them. They're not a number, because now we're getting into statistics. And that's what I love about this. There was one day there were had the same birthday, 7 victims had the same birthday, and that gets sad. But can you talk a little bit, what are some of the interactions you've had with victims, the families of victims, that stick with you, maybe give you motivation to keep going? Because I know this takes time to research and do it.
It does. And like you said, I was a little hesitant at first. I didn't want anybody to think I was trying to, get close to their tragedy or anything like that. I really just want to do it from a more, in some ways distant perspective. But I have had some family members contact me, and one of those was the sister of Rachel Divino, who died at Sandy Hook. And this has been a tough time for them because it's, they just had the 10-year anniversary of that shooting. And one of the things that she said that really stuck with me, and I got her permission to share before, because I used this in one of my posts for the 10-year anniversary. She said, all I want is for Rachel to be a person, not a number. And I think that, to me, it was kind of like, a bell went off when she said that, but it was really just because she was putting, probably what motivated me to do it in the first place, she was putting it into such clear language that by not recognizing the date of the shooting and massing all those people together and say, 10 died or 21 died or whatever, and you become a number, you become a statistic. By recognizing the birthday, you get to, delve into the individual removed from all those other victims, just as a person. And that's why I like, throwing in tidbits of, little things about them that were unique. And another one that I had an interaction with was the mother of a girl that died at Aurora. I think we all remember that was the theater shooting in Aurora. And this young lady, her name was Jessica Gawi, and she was a college student, an aspiring journalist, had everything in front of her. And her mom said something else that kind of stuck with me as far as driving home what these families deal with. She said, I divide everything about my life into the time before the phone call and after the phone call. And, everything about her, she said, is really gone from before. All her hopes and dreams for her daughter, Jessica. And it's interesting, not everybody can do this, but Jessica's parents have since totally reshaped their life. They founded a group called Survivors Empowered, and they have devoted the rest of their life to helping families in these situations. So when Uvalde happened, they got in their RV and they drove down and were there for weeks, basically just based on their own experiences. And then they've since networked with, lots of organizations, but they try to provide all the things that families need in the wake of these events, just preparing them for the crush of gifts that they're going to get and the people that are going to contact them. There's just so many things about this that they have to deal with in the immediate aftermath. And so they've just devoted the rest of their lives to Survivors Empowered and helping families cope with these unique kinds of tragedies.
And I think that our country must be unique in that. And that's what
Right.
it saddens me that these exist. I mean, it would be wonderful if you didn't do this, if you didn't have to do
Right.
this, you didn't feel, but it just, I mean, the Aurora, Colorado shooting happened years ago, and you would hope this will be the last one, but we know it's not.
Right.
And that's why I think what you do is so cool, in that it's this subtle reminder, this person was born on this date.
Right.
This is what this person's life was, and this person's life was cut short. And in many of those cases, things could have been done. And we just, I don't know where this gun debate goes, but this is something that just, it's kind of outside that says, hey, remember these people. And I love that. So,
Yeah.
you said something to me earlier, and I mentioned this in the column this weekend, that this plays also into your favorite poem, that you have a last line of a poem that, you aren't the parent of someone who died. You aren't a family member, and yet you feel compelled to this. And I think it plays into that poem. Can you talk a little bit about the poem that you'd mentioned to me?
So, and I will quibble just, it's not my favorite.
Okay.
But it is a poem. It's a poem that I remember reading it when I was in high school, because it drives home a painful reality about human nature and about life. So it's the last line of Robert Frost, the last two lines of Robert Frost's Out, Out. And they, because they were not the ones dead, returned to their affairs. I think when I heard that the first time, you kind of try to unpack it and understand what you just read. And it's just basically that reality that, that's the cycle of life, yes. And when somebody dies, we have to get back to the business of living, as they say all the time, and find our new normal and all those things. I think the birthday fairy is in a way an attempt for me to approach this issue and fight against that nature, to return to our affairs and discount this as something that's just going to happen that we can't do anything about, just by bringing attention. I think I used the image with you in our previous discussion about, I feel like sometimes I'm lighting a match and holding it up in the air, and it just goes out every time. But it's a fight against that, to just be that little reminder, that little match, coming back and recognizing this human being, this is their birthday, they should be this old today. All these shootings are recent enough that the vast majority of these victims would still be thriving, and many of them would be just now reaching adulthood, or so it just kind of brings that reality to, if not for this horrible mass shooting, if this 17-year-old kid didn't have access to an AR-15, then this person would be here, they'd be this old, and who knows what they'd be doing today. So.
Well, and with that poem, it talks about that human nature of returning, but those parents never do. The families never return to normal. There's, anytime there's violence, in a family, there's that before and after. And so you're right. It's that poem almost is kind of like, well, that's what happens, but maybe we shouldn't. Maybe that Robert Frost meant, there is something more we can do. So final question, and please, I hope everybody reads the column and follows the birthday fairy, because it's, I find it inspirational, because I learn about these people all over again sometimes. Holocaust survivor who saved 22 kids. I mean, in Virginia Tech. I mean, that's, it's worth remembering them. So my last question is, what do you hope people get out of this? The people who will follow and find you, what do you hope that they leave after reading some of these profiles?
I think first and foremost, and that's where we kind of dabbled and talked around it, I've struggled with how much to include about the shooting itself, because first and foremost, I do want to honor their life. That is my primary goal. There's a common hashtag in these victims groups, remember their names, including, we haven't mentioned this issue, something that I definitely never do is mention the name of the shooter. So it's kind of to counteract that, the publicity that the shooter gets. I frequently find when I research, I have trouble finding good information sometimes about the victim, but I can find dozens of photos and full bios and article after article about the perpetrator. That is frustrating. And it's frustrating for the families of these victims that the shooter gets remembered more than their loved one, because it's the shooter and then it's the statistic. And that unfortunately is what the mass consumption, for public news, that's what they remember. So first and foremost, it's to shine that light. That's a phrase I use over and over again, to shine a light on the lives of the victims, one at a time. Another kind of tagline I've used in trying to promote the page is that every day is the birthday of a victim of gun violence. And if I included all gun violence, I would have hundreds every day. I have limited my approach to mass shooting victims. And, even at that, I'm frequently doing multiple per day. But just driving home that, again, kind of going back to what we touched on a minute ago, when an event like this happens, we all see the headlines and we're a little bit consumed with it for maybe a week even. And then we forget and we think there's nothing we can do about it. So the daily reminder is the other thing that I'm trying to achieve, is just to remind people that every day is the birthday of a victim. Even though every day is not the anniversary of an event, every day is the birthday of a victim. And in doing that, I'm reminding them that the family member, is that whole ripple effect of people who were affected by that loss are living through that today.
I appreciate you doing the project. I did the column on it because I think more people need to follow it. I think it's a reminder of why we have to have the hard discussions around gun reform. And I'm glad you're doing it. So ask all the readers, read the column, follow her, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for giving it the attention. I truly appreciate it.